Good evening and welcome to the Sound Off Show. My name is Linda Kirker. I host the program, and thanks so much for tuning in. I really appreciate that. I think you're going to learn a lot tonight, and I have a great guest for you. His name is Lawrence Zupan, and Lawrence is running for the United States Senate to represent Vermont in the U.S. Senate. And before I introduce him or you to him, I wanted to just say that with Thanksgiving coming up before too long, one of the things I like to remember is how blessed I am, how blessed we are to live in a country based on principles that we have, and how many friends and just the love of other people that I try to share too, and I hope you feel the same way. And with that, I'm going to introduce my guest, Lawrence Zupan. Hi.
Hi, Linda. Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, and welcome to the program.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here.
You are a busy fellow.
Yes. I had 2 debates with Bernie Sanders yesterday, and today we're going to visit some companies around Franklin and Burlington County.
Oh, great.
Yeah, it's great.
Great. Well, that's the thing to do, is get out there and meet the folks, right?
Yeah, and that's, when you were making your introduction, I was reminded that one of the joys of this campaign is how many new friends I've made all around the state that I wouldn't have had the opportunity to even meet otherwise, like yourself.
Well, exactly. When you put yourself out there, the rewards come back. I'm a big believer in that.
And that's why you're doing this show, and that's probably what you've experienced in doing this show, people, being grateful for what you do.
Well, I do get some of that, yes.
Wonderful.
But I love doing it because I can bring you and other people to, the viewing public and topics of interest and importance.
Right.
And so why don't you, Lawrence, tell us a little bit about your background and why you're running for the U.S. Senate.
Sure, be happy to. Well, ever since I was a child, actually, I was in a very politically active family. We had very spirited discussions about economics and history and politics. My parents were very engaged. They met in a political context, in fact, and it carried over a little bit into our childhood.
Wow.
So I was a student from a very early age about politics and government. And of course, I must say that my father had a particular orientation which is different from the one I adopted when I grew up a little. Interesting thing is, picture me at 8 years old and my beloved dad, who's, nice, husky, loving father, talking to me and telling me what he believes, that he believed that socialism was the best system for government. And I'm 8 years old, what do I know but listening to my revered father teach me. But then, as I got a little older, and I graduated from college, and I immediately became the director of a nonprofit educational organization, and went back to school for my MBA and opened my own businesses, I began to see that life doesn't work the way I thought it did when I was 8 years old. So picture, from the age of 8, fast forward 30 years, my wonderful dad, still a socialist, is sitting in my office of a business I had set up 2 years earlier. And we're talking, and he says, so tell me, son, what are you doing here? I said, well, Dad, you see those 5 people out there? They're working for me now, and the way that I set this company up. The previous job I had, I made some savings, and then I saw a business opportunity, so I decided to start my own business, and it's going well. So those 5 people are getting a salary from me, and they're supporting their families. I pay their health insurance. I have some left over to pay myself a salary, pay the federal government my taxes, and also put aside a little bit for the growth that I hope will occur with my business when I see new opportunities. And it's kind of working great, Dad. He said, wow, son, you taught me more about your creative capitalism, as you like to call it, in half an hour than I knew in my whole life. I said, well, Dad, I'm really glad to be talking with you.
Wow.
So when I became the candidate for the U.S. Senate, I realized that that's the same kind of conversation I'd like to have with all of the children and adults of Vermont who may not have been taught the basic free enterprise principles that are at the heart and the root of all the success of everything we have in this country.
Amen.
The studio we're sitting in, the cameras that are projecting our images to the people at home, the cars we got here in, the food we're going to have for lunch, all of that comes from a blessed free enterprise system. And and I think it's a wonderful thing. And unfortunately, it's been talked down a little bit by some politicians, which ties into why I became a candidate for the U.S. Senate. I've watched with alarm the last 2 years as Bernie Sanders has basically gone around the country implicitly stating that our country is second-rate, and expressly stating that the system of socialism, which has failed miserably every place it's been tried,
True enough,
is really the system that we ought to adopt. Senator Sanders is conspicuously non-student of recent and past history, and I decided that someone like myself who loves America and loves it for the principles that have made it great, as expressed in our founding documents, the Declaration of Independence. We're endowed by a Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Wow, that's great.
it is great.
And that gives rise to the Constitution, which codifies all the rights we have and also protects us from our own government. Wow, that's something that never happened before in history. And from that, yes, and from that, it's no coincidence that from those founding documents has emerged the most successful country in the history of the world. I mean, nobody, when I was growing up, doubted the following facts, which most people don't even get taught anymore, and that's this. The United States of America has fed, housed, clothed more people with freedom than any other country in the history of the world. Conversely, socialism has caused more lack, want, death, destruction, stifling of the human spirit in the shortest amount of time than any other misbegotten system in the history of the world.
Doesn't respect the individual. It's all about control.
Right. But the way they sugarcoat it is they try to say that we're all helping each other, and that's the excuse for taking your rights away so that some elitist government can redistribute what you produce in the guise of helping other people. You know where I've seen the most help coming from?
No?
I'll tell you. People who have successfully produced for themselves and their family, which is their first responsibility, and have enough left over to share with their neighbors, to share with the causes they care about, to share with the spiritual organizations that they believe in and that nurture them, to help those who are truly less fortunate. Where does the abundance come from to help other people?
Work.
If you haven't first worked to produce it for yourself, how are you going to help other people?
Exactly.
And then, if you have produced for yourself, you have the joy, the privilege, and the responsibility to help others. So, the system really works wonderfully, and I'm so happy for it.
It does. That's a great explanation. And where does it all begin? It begins with families and schools teaching our young people work ethic. I've said this on this show a number of times, but I've had the blessing of being invited to speak to the 7th and 8th graders a couple of times in St. Albans. And I told them about my upbringing and how blessed I was to be expected to do jobs at home. And so you learn the work ethic, personal responsibility, accountability for the kind of job you do. And then you get the rewards not only of feeling good about yourself, that you're capable of doing something, but also you get a little allowance so you can go to the Saturday movie when you get old enough. And our families need to instill that in our young people, and our schools need to reinforce that.
Yes.
And what I've told the students, just one thing that I'll mention, and that is that the more that government does for you, the less control you have over your life.
That's right. And that's not the American way, and it's not the way that has given us the greatest success in the history of the world.
Exactly.
In fact, the more socialism we have, the more we go in the exact opposite direction of prosperity, abundance, and overflowing to give to others.
Exactly. And it's when you have worked hard and you've been able to accrue a little finance, a little money for yourself and your family, then you have that capacity, that ability to give and to share. And when you give and you share with others, you're also helping yourself because you feel, I did a good thing.
Yeah, you're right. And it's a funny thing, you probably noticed this, that the more you give, the more you seem to have. It's a certain almost mysterious thing that occurs, because when you give, it gets given back to you. And it's a beautiful thing.
It is.
And
I
it's a
believe
joy
it.
that if people don't work and they depend on the government, it would be understandable that they would think, I don't have enough to give, and they may not, or they may think they don't. But so they never experienced the joy of giving. But something I've done, I've practiced, when I've had the most financial difficulty in my life, what I've told myself is, okay, you have the most financial difficulty, you need to do one thing. You need to give to somebody else the little bit you have, because that'll multiply back to you. It's counterintuitive. You think when you have the least, you get protective and defensive of what you have, but that's when you need to open up the most and give a little bit of what you do have to someone else.
And you know what? Your resources aren't always just financial.
No.
Sometimes you give of yourself
Right.
to help a neighbor or a little child who's struggling or whatever.
Yeah.
Then you're reinforcing your self-image.
Right. And you're showing the grace and the glory of,
You care.
that you care. And,
Absolutely.
and if you're a religious person, then you're reflecting the values that your God has imparted to you.
I was going to say that.
Yeah.
Well, while we're talking about overbearing government and controlling government, and the more that government does that, the less control we have over ourselves. And so, what about Medicare for all? This is a Bernie thing.
Well, you got to give Senator Sanders credit. He's got some people giving him good little marketing cliches, Medicare for all. And at first glance, if you just wave a magic wand and say, Medicare for all, everybody's got all the insurance they need forever, now and again, and there's no cost for it, and it's going to just occur. It might be worth considering. But actually, Medicare for all is a formula for Medicare for none. Like Senator Sanders, I want to see everybody have the best health care. I want to see them have health care that's better than what the billionaires have today. And here's the good news. Because of the dynamism of the American economy, because of the breakthroughs in the digital age, we are entering a golden age of health care. And if a health care excellence that surpasses what we've ever experienced. Did you know that in just 2 years, the total sum of medical knowledge will double every 73 days? I mean, the medical knowledge from the beginning of time to the year 2020 will double every 73 days. The genome, which is the DNA map of the human body, which cost $3 billion and 10 years to produce the first one, will soon be available for less than the cost of taking a shower. So what are the implications of all of this? The implications are that we're going to be able to have better possibilities, breakthrough possibilities for cures and longevity than we've ever known before. Now, how is everybody going to be able to tap into this and have these things available? Well, first of all, we need to tear down the walls that restrict competition. Because right now, tomorrow when my wife goes shopping, she's going to be able to choose from 40 different kinds of breakfast cereal. When I call my insurance possibilities tomorrow, I'll have 1.4 possibilities in the state of Vermont. What's up with that? Here's the way it should be. It should be, if I want to buy some insurance, I should say, okay, you 30 insurance companies out there, line up at the door, thank you, take a number. Okay, number one, please sit down, tell me what you have. Oh, the deductible is what? Oh, the premium is what? Well, thanks so much for coming in.
Bye.
Don't call us, we'll call you next. And we should, as a buyer's market, we should be able to interview 30 and pick the one that serves our needs the best. And you know what will happen if we have choice spread across many different competitors? 3 things always happen when you have competition in a market. The quality of the offering goes up, You get innovative new products and services. Look at the post office. When did they get overnight delivery? When UPS and FedEx pushed them into it.
Sure.
You get better quality, you get innovation, and the costs go down. So that's what will happen with health insurance when we no longer have a blockage against competition. In addition, there are many other things that need to be done. We need to lower the barrier for new products to enter. FDA costs $2 billion for a company to break through a new bioinvention or a new pharmaceutical agent. Why should that be? It shouldn't be. It isn't that cost elsewhere. We should have tort reform so that doctors don't have to pay ridiculous insurance premiums for malpractice insurance, which is making many of them not even want to be doctors anymore or enter it.
I was going to go there. Go ahead.
Okay. Health savings accounts where people can manage their own relationship with their doctors and their finances with regard to health care better. So all of these different things are possibilities that will give us the healthcare system that will be truly the envy of the world. And as far as these often spouted notions that our healthcare is our prescription drugs cost more and we spend twice as much on healthcare. There's a reason why we spend twice as much on healthcare, because we don't get the same benefit of the biomedical research and the cost reductions that the other countries who are piggybacking on all of the research we've done, we don't get that. And we spend twice as much because we get to use the medicines that we produce, and we don't hold back and ration necessary things like mammograms, CAT scans, which in some of Senator Sanders' favorite countries like UK and Denmark and Sweden, they ration by age. Imagine how would you feel being a senior citizen, or me being a senior citizen, being told by a doctor, well, we could do more for you, but since you're already over 70, you're probably not going to. You're dispensable. You're not going to live that long anyway. The cost-benefit analysis, Mr. Zupan or Mrs. Kirker, does not justify us spending the money to keep you alive. Have a good day.
Exactly.
Well, that's what's already going on. I'm not making this up. They don't put it quite as bluntly and honestly.
That's government.
That's government for you. That's what's going on in UK, Denmark, and Sweden, these wonderful places that Senator Sanders think are heaven on earth that we need to imitate. Well, in fact, these countries that have a bigger welfare system have a socialized medicine, but the reason they're able to have their socialized medicine, there's about 4 reasons for it. 1, we provide a defense umbrella for them, so they don't have to have any real defense. 2, they ration, so they don't give the same kind of care for people, no matter what their age is, that we do here. 3rd, they're piggybacking and getting a free ride on the prescriptions and the biomedical research that has been done for them in the precious United States of America, which is doing more for the health of the world than Senator Sanders wants to talk about.
Well, and what you're saying is, in very simple terms, is that the people in this country are subsidizing, paying for all of the medical research that's being done for medications, and then when they're sold to other countries, they're given a much lower price because they're excluding the cost of the generation of these drugs.
That's right. So they're getting a free ride on the American system of healthcare, which frankly is the envy of the world. When people for whom price is no issue, like the wealthiest people in other countries, get sick, where do you think they go? They don't go to Denmark, Sweden, and Finland for their health. They come to the Mayo Clinic. They come to Boston. They come to the best places in the world for health care. So,
well, we have some changes that have to be made, but Medicare, I have heard, because I have Medicare, and then I pay for a supplement, and of course, my Social Security, the government takes a certain amount out of that every year, out of my Social Security check, toward Medicare. So it's not cheap, but... and
you paid into it all your life with every job you've ever had. You've paid a premium for Medicare.
And now we have, this leads me right into another topic, and that is the Social Security Trust Fund, okay?
Which has no more trust left, and it's less a fund than it ought to be.
Well, the Congress at large, Senate and House, I believe, maybe it's just the House because they're the money entity in government, but they have taken well over $2 trillion out of the Social Security Fund over 30 years.
But they left a little IOU in the vault, haven't they?
A big IOU, yeah. So what is that? That's our money. And that's a disrespect of the people.
Well, it's a misappropriation and malfeasance. It ought to be forbidden by law.
So we need a bill that puts a lockbox. There is a bill, actually.
Proposed.
It is proposed. I can't give you the number of the bill. I have that at home. But to put a lock on that fund, so to speak, if there's anything in it. Right. Except IOUs.
Right, I agree, and I would support such a measure if I had the privilege of representing the people of Vermont.
Vermont and Maine have two of the highest percentages of senior citizens. Mm-hmm. And we count on our Social Security.
Mm-hmm. Right, which regrettably, because of things like you've discussed and government mismanagement, the Congressional Budget Office estimates that by 2026 there won't be any money left, either for Medicare or Social Security. Now, drastic measures will have to be and will be taken, but right now, that's what the projection is. I ought to go back and finish the one important point about Medicare. No, not at all. No. Medicare for all, the preposterous notion that Bernie Sanders puts forward, besides being Medicare for none, both a liberal and a conservative think tank, both estimated the 10-year cost at about $32 trillion. Now, to paraphrase William Proxmire, a congressman from the 70s, who said at the time, hey, you spend $1 million here and $1 million there, pretty soon you're talking about real money. Well, now, and that used to ring true back in the 70s. Now, hey, $1 trillion here and $1 trillion there, pretty soon you're talking about real money. So let's talk about what $1 trillion is. $1 trillion is 1,000 billions. $1 billion is 1,000 millions. And $1 million is 1,000 thousands. Now maybe you can picture the stack of $100 bills and how high close to the moon it would take. So even Bernie Sanders tacitly, implicitly, and embarrassingly, I believe, admits that his plan could only be 50% financed by raising 5 taxes on the American people, which would more than double the tax burden of his free Medicare. And then the other 16 trillion, we'll just add that to the national deficit. Now, I don't know about you, but if I kept doubling the amount of money I owed without being able to meet those obligations, I would lose my house and car and be out in the street. And if we don't watch, and this ties into another subject of probable interest to you, if we don't watch the deficit growth, which is already at $22.5 billion today, and Bernie, trillion, excuse me, see, $1 billion here, $1 trillion there. 22.5 trillion. Bernie Sanders wants to add 16 trillion to it. That's suicide. That's economic suicide and untenable. But furthermore, it's not even necessary because we have the better way I talked about.
How are you going to provide free education and health care for all and everything if you don't just continue to raise up the national debt? We have to start paying down that debt.
We have to, the first thing we need to do is stop the bleeding, which is equivalent to stop adding to the debt.
Absolutely.
Then we have to do the responsible thing, which anybody who owes money does, is figure out a way to gradually pare it down and pay it down to the entities that have loaned it to us. Mm-hmm. If we don't do that, there will be a day of reckoning, because the long historical sweep tells us that the empire, which was Rome and Greece and Persia, went the way of ancient history by making the exact same mistakes that we are making. And what are those mistakes? Printing money without backing, spending more than we bring in, and having ill-advised military adventures which cannot be sustained by a populace that doesn't fully understand why we're even in them. And I say that as a person who believes that national defense is the most legitimate constitutional role of the federal government.
Absolutely.
And I'm very strong on defense. But there is a difference between being extremely strong on defense and not being extremely circumspect, careful, and studious before we commit any of the lives of our precious veterans and our financial resources to any military affairs. It's the most sobering and serious role that any senator has to undertake.
Well, I agree that the prime responsibility of our government, as it was founded, is to protect this nation.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that includes having a border wall.
Mm.
Right now, we have this caravan coming in. I hope, I don't understand why the Democrats in Congress will not cough up the money for the wall once and for all.
Well, we could speculate as to the motives. Some have suggested they like the idea of people pouring in over the borders because they're more likely to vote Democrat. I don't know, but whatever their motives are.
Multiculturalism?
Yeah, the basic disdain for the core reality of who we are as a nation. Mm-hmm. Immigrants have come here, but they've always assimilated. I thank God that my grandparents who came here unable to speak English darn well learned, so that by the time my parents were born, they were in an English-speaking family and could get educated and could become very contributing members of our society.
Mine too.
So, yeah,
they were blessed. They felt blessed.
Blessed to be able to learn the language and contribute to a great country.
Just to come here. They didn't demand it. They came through Ellis Island. Have you been there?
Yeah.
It's so impressive.
Yeah.
So impressive. I would recommend to you, viewers, if you've not been to New York City and gone to Ellis Island, it's quite a history lesson.
Mm.
It's wonderful. And we need that again. We need another type of Ellis Island for people to come legally into this country, have a sponsor and so forth.
Right. So when we have caravans that seem to be suspiciously well organized, and I would love to know just how these people are traveling thousands of miles and still look relatively fleshy, well-fed, even showered in their clothes. Look, who is financing this? But whoever, whether it's a nefarious enemy of our nation or just some spontaneous uprising, which I truly doubt.
Me too.
The fact is that a country without its borders is not a country.
Amen.
And the rest of the world is laughing at us that we even doubt this obvious fact, that that a significant percentage of our body politic is willing to doubt that we have a right to defend our border. 7,000 people is an invading army, even if they don't have guns, which some of them may. So we have to have a way to deal with this that protects the sovereignty of our nation. And what is the sovereignty of our nation but the sovereignty of the people who are citizens of the nation and have built it, pay taxes here, and are responsible for the infrastructure of our nation? We don't owe these thousands of people pouring across the border any consideration at all. But what we do need to do is to protect and preserve our nation.
I agree 100%. We have become, I hate to use, maybe I won't use that term, but, well, kind of a dumping ground for anybody in the world that thinks they should come here. You know, I understand people want to come here, and I understand why they want to come here. However,
there's a legal way and there's an illegal way.
Respect our laws, respect our people.
Mm-hmm.
Come with a plan to be a productive citizen in a legal way.
Right. You know, the people who are the multicultural crowd who don't believe in borders at all like to make fuzzy the very critical distinction between legal immigration and illegal immigration. They've even come up with a euphemism or a fuzzy term called undocumented migrants instead of illegal aliens, which is what they are.
Right.
They're alien, meaning they're foreigners,
right,
and they're illegal if they come across the border without permission.
Right.
So let's call it what it is, and let's deal with it accordingly.
Exactly. Where's your mic?
Is my mic?
Oh, okay.
You not hear
Just
me?
checking.
Okay.
Just
Still
checking.
here.
Yes, I'm glad you are. Okay, well, just follow this line of thinking a bit, Lawrence. Where was I going? Oh dear, where was I going? I had a thought and I lost it, but I can do that.
That's okay. You've got permission. You've got the prerogative. You're doing extremely well to have a show like this and share so much with your community. May I take the lead and just bring up the subject then? Okay,
Please
thanks.
do.
You know, the economy is a critical part of our lives, both personally, as a community, as a state, and as a nation.
Right.
And one of the things that you and I were talking about before we came on the show was education and its relationship to the economy. What we've experienced is a reduction of 20% in the student body here in Vermont. Yet, of course, the infrastructure for paying for education has not declined because the buildings are there, the teachers are there, the staff is there, and all of the associated expenses, which has pressed us into something called Act 46. And this is a state affair rather than a U.S. senatorial affair, but you'll see where I'm going with this. And Act 46, which is the proposed consolidation of schools, which means the closing of many local schools, has been seen as a cost-saving device, and I suppose it is. But I have a revolutionary idea, if my opponent Bernie Sanders doesn't mind me borrowing back the idea from our first revolution, which he's used for his proposed second revolution. And here's my revolutionary idea. And it's not my idea, but it's one that was shared with me by a couple of brilliant Vermonters named Asher Crisp and Ben Kinsley, who've developed something they call the International Student Program. So what if we make it possible for overseas students whose parents can afford to send them here, we let them come here, embed themselves in the community, paying $35,000 a year into the educational system, get the American education, learn our ways. Their parents, when they come here, also will help the communities by spending money to be here, use the hotels, the restaurants, the shops. It's reasonably estimated that if we invited 10,000 such students here to populate the unused occupancy capacity of our existing schools, it would add $650 million, I'll repeat that, $650 million into the coffers of the state. And this would be from people who come here to be educated, and a few per community spread out, 10,000. And what would be the results? Well, for one thing, the local schools will not have to close. Act 46 would become an obsolete, unnecessary law. The 18,000 teachers that many of whom are looking at possibly being fired or cut back would be able to keep their jobs. The education component of our property tax, which is between 80 and 90%, not only would stop going up, but listen to this. Imagine if your property tax actually went down. What? Am I dreaming? Yes, it's possible by bringing in revenue to use assets that we already have and are already paying for. We can actually improve our economy, boost our education, lower our property taxes, and be spreading the values of Vermont back out to the nations of the world. Talk about, equity and diversity, it would accomplish that. Talking about boosting our economy, it would accomplish that. Talking about helping our education infrastructure, it would help that. Talking about keeping local control in the parents in the hands of the parents and local community leaders, it would accomplish that. So I want to promote this program as something to be thoughtfully examined, scrutinized, looked at from the pros and cons standpoint, and considered for being utilized by the state of Vermont.
May I?
Please.
You know that I'm not exactly in tune with that proposal.
Right.
Are you saying, Lawrence, that because are you saying that we have too many teachers now, and that's what's bringing the cost up? So if we bring in more students, we can still keep those teachers?
Well, I'm saying that when we were operating at X, which was 100%, and we had 18,000 teachers, and now we're at 0.8X, or 80% of the amount of students we used to have, there's 20% fewer people utilizing the services. So the temptation and the reasonable economic decision might be to cut back on the use of those teachers. But those teachers have gotten to the status of being teachers by being trained, having the experience of being teachers, valuable members of the community. If we can keep them working by filling those classrooms with students that they can teach, which is what they love to do and are trained to do and are paid to do, and if those students bring with them $35,000 a year into the communities where they come, then I think it's a very intelligent project that's worthy of consideration.
Well,
because if we did fire those teachers, they'd have to either retrain or find another job, or be supported by the state through welfare and unemployment insurance, which runs
open up
out.
a private school.
Yeah,
They could do that.
Okay, that's a possibility.
Oh, shoot. Okay. Well,
You know,
it's an idea.
it's an idea. It needs to be inspected. It needs to be considered. It needs to have holes punched in it. It needs to be pushed and pressed and prodded and looked at from every angle, because it is a big project. But it shows promise in terms of the bullet points.
Well, from an international standpoint, Lawrence, the United States does not fare very well comparatively with other countries in the world in math and science, I think it is.
Yeah.
So why, I'm wondering why people would want their children to come here.
Right. Well, outside the country where we have politicians like Bernie Sanders talking down our country prominently and repeatedly and persuading us that we are somehow a second-rate nation, in the rest of the world, our country is still the envy and the role model of the world. Because of our freedom,
Yep.
because of our values, because of our respect for the individual, and overall our education system does offer these values embedded in our educational system. Yes, and so for high school students, for college students, they might choose specialties in our country or elsewhere, but for high school students, the billionaires and millionaires of China and the Middle East, and wherever people are in the economic ascendancy and have the disposable income, many of them would love to send their students here. I see it in Manchester, where Burton Seminary, which is a private school which takes public money and accepts public students, has private students, international private students coming from all over the world. And they go back with the values and the education that's available from
Capitalism and individual
free enterprise. They come here and they're embedded and surrounded by what works, and they see, just like whatever if you jump in a pool of clean water, you'll be clean. If you jump in a pool of other kind of water, you get that taint. And when they're immersed in our culture and the free enterprise culture which we have, and the success which they see all around them, which we still have, and we still have the values that made America great, they take that back. So it's a great international relations program. It's great for spreading the values of America. It's great for the economy. And I believe it could solve several of our problems potentially at the same time, unless there's something huge that I'm missing.
Well, maybe there could be a trial.
Yeah, everything could be a trial. I mean, and in order to do it, we'd have to take a look at the F1 visa program, which right now only allows students in for a year at a time.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe the first thing to do is to find all of those multi-thousands of students who have overstayed their visas, and let's do a little research on. It's not only student visas, but other visas, excuse me, that people have not respected our policies because we don't enforce them, okay? That's
right.
our fault.
Yes.
So if we can track these people down and say, you know what? You're out of here.
Right. You know, laws, if after thoughtful consideration, our federal government has made a law, then it's the federal government's responsibility to enforce that law.
Amen. Amen.
And so anybody who breaks a law has to be called to account because we are a nation of laws. And that's what protects the people who operate in our country from tyranny and from having their own rights overridden by people who break the law. So that needs to be done.
Exactly. And if what you're saying, I believe, is that if we don't respect and enforce our own laws, then any negative effects that come from that are on us.
Well, of course.
And so what are we doing about these things?
Well, you know, that's a very good question.
These are things that have gone on for years and years and years. And a lot of things are being addressed right now, but there's a lot more. Just like I'm always saying in Vermont, we need an audit of the Department of Education. We need an audit of the Agency of Human Services. And
yeah, I mean, I just read recently about the amount of fraud and abuse in our own welfare system right here in Vermont, and that if we spent even a fraction of that abuse to have watchdogs to evaluate who is cheating the system, we would save untold tens of millions of dollars. Mm-hmm. You know, if you and I, say, had $50,000 in cash, say, laying around in our house, we wouldn't leave it laying around unprotected.
No.
Would we?
No.
Because it's our money and we're not stupid. But every government which receives money from its taxpayers has a solemn obligation to protect its money just as well. However, the unfortunate truth is that the further the presence of the money is from the persons who've earned it, the less care and scrupulous attention is given to protecting it.
Exactly.
Which is an argument, and a compelling one, I believe, for keeping as much money as possible in the hands of the people who actually earned it. Because
I'll buy that.
Okay, and you won't have to buy it because it'll be free. You'll have enough to, yeah, okay. I don't want to stretch the metaphor too far. But the fact is that no money gets spent more productively, with as much prudence, with as much industry, and with as much good result as the money spent by the person who's worked and strained to earn it.
Absolutely.
And that's why government, by definition, is inefficient with the expenditure of our money. As Calvin Coolidge said, the collection of any taxes above more than is absolutely necessary is nothing more than legalized theft. Thank you, Calvin.
Thank you, Cal. Silent Cal.
So, fortunately, he wasn't always silent.
No, he wasn't. I agree with what you've said wholeheartedly. Nobody cares more about the fruits of their labor than the person who labored.
And that's this point in principles reflects again the brilliance of the founders of our Constitution.
There you go.
Who devolved all other responsibilities not explicitly given to the federal government down to the states, to the local communities, and down to the individual. Yep. Because they had the wisdom to know. And that's why we want to keep local control of schools. And the more money that's spent very locally, where people can go to their neighbor who's on the board and say, wait a minute, and has direct inputs, that is going to be a well-run school. It's going to be a school that's responsive to the needs of the parents, not some bureaucrat in the state or the federal level.
Yeah.
And is going to be the best school for the students of that municipality.
I agree. And I would go a step further and say that I believe that the Department of Education at the national level should be eradicated, and that the states and particularly the communities where the people are tuned in and watchful and they care a lot about the results that are attained for their children. And so they can be a watchdog.
Yeah, we have to have that. Wherever we have money, resources, and assets of the taxpayers. There has to be a watchdog policing entity to make sure that it's not getting stolen.
But my experiences, and folks who are watching, I implore you, pay attention, ask the questions, get involved, and hold people accountable who are responsible for any part of our governments, local, state, or federal, but we have more of a voice at the local level, except when we vote. There. So vote for Lawrence Zupan.
Thank you, Linda.
Well, you're only new to me recently, but I'm sensing that you're a very intelligent man. You think things through carefully. You care about this country. That means you care about the people at large. And you're a businessman, so you think things through and want good results.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I think there should be term limits.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
In Washington, and frankly, I think Bernie and Senators Bernie and Leahy have had their time.
Well, I agree, and I've basically decided that I have enough of a commitment that Bernie Sanders' time should have expired already, that I've put my rest of my life on hold to make myself available to replace him. Mm-hmm. And I agree with you. The absence of term limits has allowed stagnation, crony capitalism, too much interference of corruption in campaign finance by people accumulating tens of millions of dollars from one campaign to the next, and basically having a shutting out effect on new entries who could do a better job than them. Look, my campaign budget is a tiny, tiny fraction of Bernie Sanders. If I was on an equal footing with him financially, then my message could be heard by everybody in the state. And I believe I would be well ahead even now. And even now, I believe I'm disproportionately affecting the dialogue, even with the limited amount of funds that our campaign has. But if somebody still would like to help me, my website is zupanforsenate.org. And we're getting the message out, even in this last week of the campaign, about what works for Vermont. And it's all about Vermont. Yesterday I asked Bernie Sanders, tell us, Senator Sanders, how can you justify having missed 37 out of 38 votes one quarter, 115 out of 163 for the year? How can you justify such dereliction of duty? And can you promise the people of Vermont that if somehow you are reelected, that you will serve the people of Vermont only for the next 2 and 6 years? And he would not say yes. All he did was say he has the right not to answer the question, that he was, I was running for president, and I might run for president again, so I can't promise that if you put me in office, I will continue to serve you. I said, well, you voters of Vermont, you just heard from him yourself. I think everything you need to know as to whether you're going to be hiring another absentee landlord to serve you. And I was asked if I would commit to not missing more than 5% of votes. I said, I doubt I'd miss any votes because I would crawl in my shorts over broken glass to get to the place where I needed to vote. Because if I'm elected, I'll be doing nothing else but serving the people of Vermont as a full-time dedicated senator.
Well, and I believe that, Lawrence. I think that when people are in Congress for, perhaps not all, I don't want to generalize and say all, but there are those who lose sight of what their responsibility is to the people. And they're more interested in getting big donations from major corporations, and then they have to do their bidding, and then we get lost in the shuffle. And the job is to represent the people of your state.
That's right.
And I think there comes a time when you've been there long enough.
I agree. And I don't believe that big money has a role in, or should have a role in, the elections process. I understand the argument that giving money is an expression of free speech. It's a little bit of a stretch. I think that the first way to get campaign money out of, disproportionate campaign money out of our election system is term limits. That's step one. Step two is to consider some of the many different possibilities. Anonymous donation, equal funding for every candidate, so it's not the money that gets them elected, but the quality of their ideas and their ability to share them with the people that are being asked to vote for them.
So when you say, Lawrence, equal funding for all candidates, who's going to do the funding?
Well, I think it's worth considering, and I haven't made a decision on this yet, but it's worth considering that since the election of our officials is a function of government, that possibly a small stipend from the voters, from the taxpayers, equally distributed, would be a possibility worth considering. Other than that, allowing unlimited funding, but it has to be anonymous so that nobody would be beholden to the person who gives them a disproportionately large amount of money.
In other words, a legislator or a senator would not know the source of the money.
That's right.
Except that, so it would go into like a general fund?
No, could be allocated, the idea, and it's just an idea that needs to be studied, that the person who is designated to receive the money receives it, but there's a mechanism for keeping the donor anonymous.
That would be a little tough to do, because that donor would want to be known to that person.
Well, if that was his reason for giving it, then maybe he wouldn't give it, and there would be less money influence in politics.
Who knows?
Yeah. Again, like all
That's
ideas,
tricky.
it has to be evaluated from top to bottom.
Yeah. It's just you're throwing out a
I'm throwing out different
potential.
possibilities.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let me see here. We've covered that. We've covered that. Covered that. Well, how about climate change? Mm-hmm. If you want to go there, unless you have another topic.
No, climate change is a wonderful idea to talk about, and our governor has talked about having a 35% supply of green energy, renewable energy for the state by 2050. Well, I've got good news for everybody who loves renewable green energy. And by the way, just like everybody on both sides of the political spectrum, I have a pair of lungs that breathe, and they're pink, and I like to keep them pink, and I want my children, their lungs to be working vigorously. And so I'm very much in favor of reducing environmental corruption and pollution. So here's the good news. If the government would do the opposite of what the the people who are talking about climate change all the time want, and get out of the renewables business and get out of the crony capitalism which favors certain renewables, favors certain companies in renewables, which Barack Obama did. He gave a loan of $5 billion to a renewables solar company, which they promptly went bankrupt and didn't pay back. And that was taxpayer money. It wasn't Barack Obama's money, obvious to say. So if the government gets out of it, here's what's going to happen. The companies that are not subsidized by crony capitalism in the government anymore will have to innovate or die. And the good news here is that if they're forced to innovate, instead of getting fat and happy with a cigar and a martini, we're getting enough money from the government, we don't have to do much more, they will innovate, because it will be innovate or die. So again, with the amazing amount of new technologies that are at hand, which, unless you're a student of it, it's hard to know just how magnificent it is. Right now, there's things like plasma fusion energy, which might obsolesce all of the favorite renewables of the moment. It might obsolesce solar, wind, and geothermal, but even those industries are continuously becoming more efficient and less costly, so that if the industry is allowed to operate, I predict that by 2030, we will have a choice of being up to 90% renewable within 12 years, which, not coincidentally perhaps, is directly parallel to the climate a report that just came out which purports to state that the world will collapse in an environmental puddle of a mess in 12 years if we don't take certain steps. Of course, these environmental groups with these big, wide-ranging reports, I'm sure it's just a coincidence that their solution always entails supra-governmental entities taking charge of all the resources of the world and violating the sovereignty of the United States of America. I'm sure that's just a coincidence. So the good news is they don't have to go to all that trouble. They don't have to violate the sovereignty of the United States. They don't have to tell the United States how much carbon output they have to, by their legislation, accomplish. All we have to do, as the most ingenious country in the history of the world, is continue with the development of the renewables that are already underway, and this problem will be solved. Look, let me just show you something. If we left to the UN and Bernie Sanders the solution to our problems, if we had let them invent the iPhone instead of Steve Jobs, we'd still be making like Clark Kent looking for a telephone booth. If we leave to Bernie Sanders his idea of how to solve climate change and how to do health care, we will have similar results. We'll have the phone booth of environmental assistance. So the solution is what's always solved every problem that Americans have ever faced. The solution is unleashing free enterprise, eliminating government crony competition and government monopolies, and we will solve every problem that besets us. And as a 21st century, not 19th century senator like Senator Sanders, I will lead the role of our free enterprise in solving those problems.
Wow. I'm with you. Free enterprise is where it's at. And I'm not a big, here's how I feel, for whoever cares. Get out of my car, get off my yard, get out of my house, get out of my kitchen. I can decide what works for me. I just resist people trying to control my life.
Nobody
I'm an
likes it.
adult.
Yeah.
I can think for myself. I may not do everything that somebody else would like, but that's my choice. I'm paying the tab.
Yeah.
You know, they're trying to tell us what kind of appliances we can use in our home.
Yeah, well, it's Big Brother in his infinite wisdom wants to run every aspect of our life.
Just crush the people and their ability to, to function on their own. Granted, there are some things that could be improved. I agree that. But anyway, we're down to 2 minutes or 1 minute and something. So anything last you want to say?
It's no coincidence that Senator Sanders wants to control by government 15% of the American economy, which is what healthcare is. One of the questions I didn't get to ask Senator Sanders is which sector of our economy don't you think government should control? And my answer, if I'm asked which sector the government should control, is none. The government should enforce the laws that protect people from contravening, going against the constitutional and legal rights of other citizens. It should protect and defend the United States of America, but it should not legislate every aspect of our lives.
Amen.
As I said earlier, and I would like to repeat, if you don't mind, in the few seconds we have left, our free enterprise system has fed, housed, and clothed more people with freedom than any other country or system in the history of the world, in contrast to the system of socialism, which has caused more lack, suffering, deprivation, death in the shortest amount of time than any other misbegotten system in the history of the world. I choose America's system of free enterprise, and I ask for your vote on November 6th. My name is Lawrence Zupan, and I want to be your next U.S. Senator. And I thank you for your time.
Well said. Thank you, Lawrence, for coming on the program.
My pleasure, Linda.
Best of luck to you. I think you'd be a welcome change and a great representative for the people of our state, Senator, but in representation.
Thank you.
So, folks, what was your site?
Oh, it's zupanforsenate.org. That's Zupan for Senate, forsenate.org.
Okay. All right. Thanks for tuning in, folks. Have a great week. I'll see you again next week. Good night.